If it wasn't for this week's guest, pop music wouldn't be what it is today. As one half of the iconically queer, artistically singular duo Tegan and Sara, her music has paved the way for other queer women to dominate the charts. But while many people have said they wanted to be Tegan and Sara, one of them actually tried it. So here to talk about the new Hulu documentary Fanatical and her catfishing saga that inspired it, please welcome back to Keep It, Tegan.
Yay, I'm so glad to be back. And without Sara, what a joy.
Liberation, yes.
Liberation.
Finally. Your moment is here.
Usually we have to share the questions and keep our answers short. Man, what a joyful thing. Thank goodness for fake Tegan. That's one positive I can say from someone pretending to be me and trying to destroy me and dozens of other people's lives is now I get to do press alone.
We had the Veronicas here not too long ago, and it's interesting.
Amazing.
I mean, you would obviously relate to this, but it's so interesting watching them like sort the question. Like they instinctively know that sometimes you have to wait for the other one to speak first, and then there's a whole choreography to it that I'm sure is maddening.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is people. The two things that I find kind of annoying is when someone asks one of us a question. Well, ask a question generally, so not directed to one of us. And then one of us will answer it, and we've clearly covered it all, but then they'll look at the other one, waiting for the other one to respond, and we're like, no, we've got this figured out, bitch. Don't worry about it. I'm going to answer, you're going to ask another question, she's going to answer. And then the other thing is that it's not even I don't enjoy doing press with Sara, it's just I've heard her answer these questions millions of times, so mostly I'm just thinking this isn't a productive use of my time, because I'm just sitting here listening, and I've already heard this.
Fegan would actually be also very valuable in this regard, too. Just answer the questions, too. Let me move on with my life. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Okay, starting talking about this movie. First of all, what a shocking saga. As we already said, it's a catfishing journey that happened. Somebody pretending to be you, reaching out to fans, forming close relationships with many fans, and having lots of your personal information. How did you... my question is, how did this turn into a movie? As in, were you... did you present it as an idea to somebody else, or how did this come into I can't even believe there's enough that happened that it would be cinematic, let alone this compelling.
Well, I suppose that's up for debate, but a couple years ago I told the story to a friend of mine, and he was sort of ensnared in me telling, I just started to unravel the story. I hadn't done that in a long time. The active years of fake Tegan that were most dominant were 2011 to 2015. And after that, I sort of tried to compartmentalize it, and it comes up all the time, but I hadn't told the story in a really long time. So this friend of mine let me tell this whole story, and then he suggested I write it down. So I wrote a story called Fake Tegan, and I pitched it to my agents as a podcast. I was sort of very aspirational, we'll do a serial style podcast. We'll tell the story that we know, and then we'll sort of investigate in real time. And they thought it was a great idea. So I pitched it to this woman, Jenny Elliskew, who I'm friends with, who's a writer and host on Sirius. And she immediately called me after she read the story and said, let's pitch this to Aaron Lee Carr. And her and Aaron had just worked on a movie called Britney versus Spears. And Aaron Lee Carr is a very famous documentary filmmaker. Has made now 10 films. And so we pitched her a couple weeks later, and she said, you guys, this is not a podcast. This is a movie. And we ended up joining forces with Story Syndicate, which is a big documentary production company, and went out and pitched it, and Hulu bought it. And for the last year and a half, we made a movie. And I had no idea if it was going to be worthy of a movie. There were definitely times where I thought, okay, this isn't going to work. But we were able to, interview a dozen victims and obviously pull from archival and tell this really scary story that happened to us all these years ago.
It's so interesting to watch this because obviously you are, reopening old wounds. And what's interesting too is the victims are as well. So, tell us a bit about the process of approaching these people to be a part of the documentary, and sort of had you had any contact with any of them in the time between, the initial first scandal with Tegan and then in the, out of the blue, you're messaging them and being be a part of this? Because I know there's JT who was a musician who was a casual friend of yours who had also become one of the catfishing victims, a victim of vegan. And that's a big focal point about, you two sitting down with one another.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Honestly, back in the sort of 2011 to 2015 period, so that's when we first learned about Fake Tegan, and we started to communicate with at the time, I think a couple dozen people had contacted our management. We'd put a call out saying, if you've been talking to someone pretending to be Tegan, can you reach out? I never personally spoke to any of the victims at that time. Obviously my relationship to all of the victims is complicated because all of them, for the most part, were online, on message boards or Tumblr, like looking for my personal information, and then got into a friendship or relationship with me. And that's, hard as a public figure. You're like, you need a line, you need a boundary. And so it was complicated. When this all first started, there was definitely a part of me that had less compassion and empathy and was just like, why are these people trying to get my personal information? Why do fans feel entitled to like breach our privacy? So my management mostly dealt with it at the time. I was aware of everything that was going on and reading through everything and felt terrible for all these people, but I had never spoken to any of them. And I do think actually that was probably partly why I was interested in reinvestigating this and telling the story, was that I do have more compassion now, and I wanted to understand why these people got into these relationships and how this happened. So before we'd even sold the documentary, we spoke to Julie, who's the first victim that appears in the movie. And Julie had a multi-year, I think 3-year friendship with Fake Tegan, exchanging thousands of emails and messages, and was devastated when she came forward. She'd been given really personal information, passport scans, photos, unreleased demos of ours, and had become suspicious, had become kind of, her instincts took over, and she was like, this doesn't seem right. And had contacted our management. So she was our first call when we started to work on this project. And I was devastated for her. I still feel devastated. She's so amazing and so sweet, and it's awful this happened to her. And she was the first person to agree to come on and talk about what happened. And so that was sort of our process going forward, was that, there were some victims who'd had really long relationships, and they would, Aaron, who's the director, and Alyssa and Jenny, who are our main producers, they would reach out to me and say, hey, we want to talk to Joanne. We want to talk to Julie. We want to talk to this person. Can we sort of say that you'd be up for speaking to them? And that was what landed us a lot of the victims. There were people who had very brief relationships with Fake Tegan who we didn't need for the film. There were other people who were deeply traumatized who were not able to like revisit this in a way and didn't want to come public. And then Ira, of course, you bring up JT. JT, someone I went for coffee with a couple of times in 2007 and had an old email of mine and had like reached out in like 2012 or 13 to be like, hey girl, let's connect again. And then ended up having a relationship with this person. And that was horrible. I mean, when that all happened, when I found out about JT, that added a whole layer to the Fake Tegan story that I wasn't even emotionally prepared for. Up to that point, it had just been Tegan and Sara fans, that this had affected. But when JT came forward, it opened this whole new can of worms, because I realized, oh my God, if someone's in my old email, who else were they talking to? And at that point, we investigated. I mean, we got Yahoo involved. And we found out there was like a dozen of my friends who had been talking to this person unknowingly and giving them access to personal information and photos. The only one who ended up having a relationship was JT, and, ended up having a sexual relationship. And it was devastating for JT. I mean, it was mortifying and scary. And, that part of the film and that part of the journey of reinvestigating this was really hard, obviously, because JT, similar to Tara, who's another victim in the film, their reaction to finding out that it wasn't me was the opposite of Julie. They weren't helpful at all. They were withholding, angry, called me out publicly, accused me of terrible things, grooming underage fans. They were sharing naked photos, unreleased songs. I mean, they had a very different reaction to finding out about Fake Tegan. So it was so helpful for me to revisit that 10 years later. And, they had very different reactions now too. Like JT, we had a good, conversation, whereas with Tara, we didn't. But I'm hoping that it was helpful for all of the victims to talk about it again. That's for sure.
I mean, this Fake Tegan person who's carrying on these relationships with fans who are trying to reach out to you, to a certain degree, they must have been a bit convincing Do you like reading this stuff back? Were you surprised at the sort of intuitive nature of this person? I'm reminded of that movie, that Melissa McCarthy movie, "Can You Ever Forgive Me," where she's imitating these literary voices and then selling them out. And it's like you read it back and you're like, I'm like, I both would believe it and wouldn't believe it in retrospect.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, I know myself best, and so no. One of the things that really struck me in 2011 when we first started reading through, dozens of these victims' emails was that it didn't sound like me. I am a very formal. My friends make fun of me for it. I'm very formal over email and text. I use full punctuation, like an indentation, like I didn't look at the emails and say, oh, this sounds like me. But how would they know that? Like, how would Tegan and Sara fans know what my emails look like? How would they know that I'm, a proper English, using full punctuation? Like, why would they know that? So, no, I didn't feel that the emails felt like me. And that was such a consolation or such a relief at the time, because I thought, okay, this person's not in my email. They're not pretending to be me with actual... Like the stories they would tell were not based on my real life, like it'd be like, oh, I'm cat sitting for my friend Darren, and I hate cats. Or like there's something in the movie where it says like, I got a television finally. It's like, I've always had a television, like it was just like details that didn't make any sense. And that was a relief to us, because we were like, okay, this person doesn't actually seem to know much about my real life. So then we became obsessed with figuring out, okay, well, this is them. Like, they must be making these stories up because this is actual things that they are doing. So, we fell down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out who fake Tegan was really early, because it became kind of a game. Okay, they've been cat sitting and they have a friend named Darren, and they spell recognize with an S, not a Z. Like, so is it possible they're British? We became, basically internet sleuths. But they did have a lot of things they shouldn't have had access to. Unreleased songs, photos, passport scans, personal information about me, like about a breakup or about my mom's sister being sick with cancer, stuff like that. And that scared us. That's when we started to realize like there were leaks. And at that point determined they had broken into one of our manager's emails, had set up auto forwarding. So they were getting one-sided conversations from our management and us. They'd broken into our manager's iDisk, which for the kids listening is, a version of the iCloud back in that time, or the cloud, basically. And so they did have access, but it was limited. But it was enough to sell this. And in conjunction with the fact that I was just very open, at that time, when this all started, I was willing to stop and talk to people outside the venue and chat and ask them stories. And we would do VIP and record stores, and we had FaceTime with fans a lot, and so I got to know people. And so when we started to interview a lot of the super fans and a lot of the early victims, they were like, it felt weird that you were on Tumblr making friends with fans, but there was this other part of us that was like, well, Tegan's really friendly. And I was like, oh my God, this is my fault. I was too nice.
It's interesting that this documentary came out when it did. I think that we've had an entire summer, obviously, of this conversation with Chappell Roan bringing this up, with, sort of the boundaries between fans and invasions of privacy, and even just the music and the demos thing. I think about artists that I love, like Charlie XCX, I'm wearing her sweater now. Like, she completely abandoned a Project XCX world because it leaked online, and she didn't want to release it anymore because the demos had gotten out to fans. I remember 2022, I think, like Lana Del Rey's car was broken into and her computer was stolen. So how do you feel, as an artist? One, fans are constantly wanting access to not just your personal information, but your art before you're ready to share it. And also, how would you offer advice to other artists like Chappell, especially like a queer artist like that, who are experiencing many of these things that you experienced in an early era of the internet too? Now it's, I guess, easier for her fans to even get information about her family and her whereabouts.
Yeah, it has been a crazy few months. I've been joking that it's like as if I know Chapel and text her and was like, is there any way that you could sort of have a meltdown about fandoms and toxicity online just in time for our movie to come out so you could set the scene? It's, but I mean, I'll say a couple things. Like the first is that, I mean, we've been dealing with this our whole career for sure. Like there's definitely an intrusion and entitlement that a certain very small minority of your fan base always has. And every band feels that way. Every public figure feels that way. Um, and you just learn to deal with it. And I am really inspired by this new generation of artists. Chapel is a great example, but Mitski obviously pulled back a couple years ago and no longer runs her own social media and has changed the way that she promoted her latest project. Haley Williams from Paramore during the pandemic did the same. This is something I think artists have always been going through. I mean, we toured with Katy Perry 10 years ago, and this is someone who has to spend probably 6 or 7 figures a year on security. No artist wants to do that. They're not enjoying that. They're not like, oh, I love going to dinner and then coming out and 100 people are taking photos of me. It's embarrassing. It's irritating. And we're trained as artists not to tell you that. We're trained not to say you're just as bad as the paparazzi to certain people. Like, I've been at a restaurant where someone's filming me eating. It's not pleasant. You're not like, oh, I'm popular. This is cool. You're like, that's annoying. I'm eating. I'm a garbage troll. Leave me alone. And so finding the balance for each artist is unique and different. It's your journey, figuring out where you want it to be. Chapel's telling us that her journey is not going to be populated with people like this. She is not going to accept that. And I think it's amazing and inspiring. I think for Sara and I, we sucked it up and took a lot more abuse and, dealt with the irritation and resentment we sometimes felt by setting more boundaries. But ultimately, we were trained not to say anything. And I don't know that that's right. I just know that that's the generation we come from. I'd say my advice is that you should set the boundaries for your own career. It's your journey, popularity and fame is unnatural and it's a cycle. I just actually recently listened to Katy Perry talk about this. There's a time in your career where it's really hot. And it doesn't mean you have to be stratospherically popular the way that Chapel has or the way Katy experienced fame. There's a point even in our own career where it was too much and you just pull back. And it's a cycle and you come out the other side and you think, oof, I made it through that. And, in terms of technical, advice, change your passwords, make it really difficult. Don't put your name in your own email. Your management and your whole entire team and crew, everybody should be regularly changing passwords on social media, on your email. I mean, we've worked with cybersecurity specialists multiple times in our career to help secure our devices. Don't send music over the internet. And just be prepared for it all to leak anyway, because I don't understand. It's like some sort of black magic or something. They get in anyway. It's bed bugs. But
every album leaks. Truly, I'm shocked when a pop star's album does not leak at least a couple days before.
Yeah, it's really crazy. So it's the world we live in. But it's so important, though, to remember that the vast majority of human beings and the vast majority of fans aren't like this. And. Yeah. I also think we have to zoom out and just say, like, this is a cultural thing. Like, Princess Diana died because the paparazzi were chasing her, but we're the ones that clicked and bought those newspapers. Like, Justin Bieber's been begging us all to leave him alone for years. Like, we are monsters. We, as a culture, are monsters. We love famous people, and we drive them crazy. And we drive other human beings to drive them crazy, to capitalize and monetize. And, yeah, that's like, it's dark. That's dark. Yeah. And that's ultimately what Fanatical, our movie, ended up feeling more like. Aaron Lee Carr, our amazing director, understood, I think, 3/4 of the way through. We weren't really talking about fake Tegan or unmasking fake Tegan. We were there to talk about this whole conversation about when people love you too much.
Mm-hmm. It should not be controversial to say that, people treat celebrities like shit. We talk about this on Keep It a lot. The idea that celebrities have asked for a certain amount of attention and that means they should expect and want to feel invaded is just so wild. But I guess one of my last questions for you is 10 or 11 years ago or so, it was the New Now Next Awards. And I remember you guys were performing and there was a red carpet that I was working, and Kylie Minogue was asked who she was excited to see, and she said, you guys. And I was just wondering, in general, speaking of fans and that you would actually want to have who aren't horrifying, have you had any fellow artists who've reached out and said that they're fans of yours that you particularly cherish?
Well, that I remember that moment so vividly. I mean, that was we danced on the we went out and danced afterwards, like when we were playing Closer at the end of that award show, and Kylie was out there dancing, and it was like it was very exciting. That era of Tegan and Sara, like that pop era, was really exciting, and I look back on it very fondly, even though we have been slowly like walking it back since because we didn't really love the pop era that much. I mean, I love the music, but it was too hard. It was too much work. Didn't enjoy that part of it, but yeah, so many amazing artists. Like, I've obviously brought up Katie a couple times. She was like an incredible fan, very supportive and really helped us a lot during that era. Same with Taylor Swift. Since we put out Fanatical, I mean, I love Muna. I've been a fan since day one. We've collaborated with them before, and they came to the movie premiere in LA and were really supportive. I know they're going through a lot of fan, growth issues right now. And I've been felt really touched by a lot of the artists that have reached out. I just was texting with Katie from Waxahachie, who had watched the film. And, there's a lot of really amazing female artists who are incredibly supportive to us and who I look up to and really appreciate, their support in this. But yeah, I mean, honestly, any musician that reaches out and is like, I like your band, I'm like, oh, thank God. I'm clearly, for anyone who watches the movie, I'm hungry for love. So, like I love when our peers reach out and tell us that they appreciate us. It's really meaningful to me. I love being in a band and I love getting to make music, and I love that our music has influenced so many of these new young artists that are coming up, and I just really appreciate that we still get to be at the party all these years later. It's so genuine that I cannot believe Sara and I did this. We were just back in Calgary and I'm like, God, we were such losers. We were such little dirtbags, like we were like, and the fact that we were like, have pulled this off, it's, yeah, I just feel a lot of gratitude.
It's so weird looking back, even on that era, like Louis bringing up, like back when I had first moved to LA too, the heartthrob era, it feels so distant, but that it was really just a big sort of cultural moment. And I think Closer, Heartthrob, and even I Love You to Death right after that, just like really big moments that are so different from the So Jealous era. I think it's great that you've been able to have so many different just cultural moments that mean so much to different fans.
And I mean, and it means a lot to us too. I mean, I think I watch a lot of artists try to chase past successes, and I understand the desire to do so. I've had so many conversations with amazing bands who feel that their audience just wouldn't accept something different from them. And for Sara and I think that's the key to longevity, and it's certainly been the key to our success and our longevity, which is that when we start the process of making something new, we demolish what we've done in the past. We, truly pack it up and put it in the storage unit. It's like, I don't want to try to recapture anything. For us, it's always about trying to do something new and not necessarily something new that we think people will love. It's just something new for us to entertain us. So yeah, but it's so grateful for all the different eras, and that, that heartthrob era was really exciting, and it's a thrill to talk to, so many different artists who are coming up now and are popular now saying, I mean, it makes me feel hella old, but, like when it was like, like we were listening to you guys in high school when you put out Heartthrob and it inspired us, to start a band. I'm like, God, oh my God, we're so old. But I'm thrilled, like I'm truly thrilled to see like these artists thriving. And I feel like genuine excitement to see so many queer pop stars breaking out and to see so many, female artists doing so well right now. It's a really inspiring time in music, and it's a joyful time for Sara and I, because it was a lonely career in the early days of Tegan and Sara. It was really hard, which is, to bring it back to Fanatical, is why I think we had such a connection with our audience, is because they were our peers. They were our mentors. They were the people we looked forward to seeing. They were the ones who made us get on stage every night, because before social media, we had no way of knowing other bands. Like there was no one for us. So these days, we're like weirdos. I see, an artist across the festival and I'm just like, oh my God, we have to go over and introduce ourselves. Like, for me, like, making that community so important. So anyway, yeah, a great time in music right now.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And I don't know how this news will fall on your ears, but you are a dynamite interviewee as a solo act. I don't know what this means for Tegan and Sara, but I mean, I'm a little worried and thrilled for you. So I don't know.
Yeah. Look, Sara had a kid 2 years ago. So, she's got her hands full. So, if anything, she'd probably be thrilled to know that I'm carrying the weight for both of us sometimes because, she's got a busy schedule. So she doesn't have as much time for these things. So, I'll take it. And it's lovely to see both of you again and to speak to you. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you.